Okay, Joel.
All right. All right. So we got the technical okay to proceed. So let's call the meeting to order. Um, are any things to delete or add to the agenda? Hear anything? So the next step is the minutes.
I'll move them.
There's a second. Rod seconds it. Any corrections or additions to them, or are we good to vote? It's like we're ready.
Yeah, I didn't find anything. I thought they looked good.
Okay, Taylor, you want to call the roll?
Yeah, sure. Joel?
I go last.
Oh, you want to go last? Ron Howe?
Yes.
Robert Lynch?
Aye.
Here.
Aye.
Linda Woodard? Joanne James?
Here.
Mark Whitmer?
Aye.
Ruth Groff?
Here.
Jason Leifer?
Yes.
Joel Gagnon?
Yes. Anybody opposed? And nobody abstained. So good. Lisa is here to tell us all the greatest and latest from the county.
Thanks, Joel. I think I really only have one update, and that is since TCOG last met, the county legislature held its annual budget retreat, and that's where we compile a forecast of what we know so far for the 2025 budget. And so on the expense side of the equation, we're expecting increases in New York State mandates, largely under our social services department and whole health department. And we have negotiated increases in salary and fringe costs. On the revenue side, we're facing, as many of us are here, stagnant sales tax revenues. For the first quarter of 2024, there was a 2.14% decrease from where we were in 2023. And so, and we've calculated our 2025 tax cap to be estimated at 5.09%. We've also calculated that in order to maintain our current efforts, it would require an increase of a little over $3 million on the tax levy, which would be equivalent to a 5.9% levy increase. That would be above the tax cap. So after a lot of thoughtful discussion between legislators, they've determined that they would like us to aim for a 2% tax levy increase, which is equivalent to a cut of about $2 million from our maintenance of effort budget. That would be about a $1 million increase to the levy, but a $2 million cut from where we are to maintain current efforts. So we just this morning got through our conversations and launching of our budget process with departments. Because we can't cut in any of our mandated areas, we can only cut in our discretionary programs. That is equivalent to about a 5% across the board cut to all of our departments, and we've provided them with that direction to prepare budgets, prepare a maintenance of effort budget, and prepare a second budget with that 5% cut so that we can see, what it would take to maintain current efforts and what we will be potentially losing with the 5% cut. And a lot more detail there, but I just wanted to make you aware of where we're heading into for the 2025 budget process. And I'm happy to take any questions on that or anything else.
Well, I have one. Presumably, I'm sure that the thought is running to not across the board cut, but in trying to do targeted cuts. Is that I presume that's part of the equation, and how is that being pursued?
Well, we're going to have to look and see across. This is going to entail going into department-based budgets and potentially looking at and targeted cuts to programming. But the county administration is going to have to take the first pass at this through the budget process and see what our departments come up with. And then make our recommendations to the legislature to decide further. But we started with this across the board process, but it may end up affecting different departments differently, for sure.
And Mark?
Great. Thanks, Lisa. So let's see, you said the tax cap amount was 5.09% above last year's levy.
Yes.
And then to maintain current services and operation, it would come out at a 5.9% increase, right? So that's pretty close. I guess I'm just wondering procedurally or why and that 5% number, that's based on application of growth factors and carryover or something, is that right?
It's based on a number of different things. There's an inflationary factor built in, sales tax credit offsets to towns, growth factor, pilot revenue.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just curious why 2% has then been targeted as the goal rather than maybe closer to the tax cap number, which seems almost attainable comparing 5.9 to 5.09%. Just a question.
So I'll do my best to try to represent the 14 legislators because they weren't all of one mind on this, but I will say, I think across the board, our county elected officials are hearing a lot from their constituents about inflationary factors, cost of living, and a low tolerance for increasing taxes. So that's one of many factors that they are weighing very heavily. That coupled with the competing factors of the mandates that we must provide and some of the new services that and new pressures in our budget that we are trying to respond to. So, but I think that at least that gives us a starting point, and they can hopefully add things back in
Right.
as they see fit.
Okay. Thank you, Lisa.
Anybody else for Lisa? Thanks. Sounds like you get your work cut out for you.
You bet.
Next up, our featured item of the day with Don Barber, who's here on the food policy. It characterizes the discussion with the Food Policy Council. My hope with this is that we can have a discussion sort of focused on what government can do to facilitate and address the impediments to having more of our food produced locally and regionally. So Don, take it away.
All right. So at some point in time, I'm going to want to share my screen with you because I have a PowerPoint presentation. But I'll
Yes,
start
and
by
tells me you should be able to do that already.
okay, good. Well, I won't move to that exactly yet, but I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. And for those of you that don't know, when TCOG was first formed, I was the initial chair for 4 years before I could get somebody to join me and do the co-chair routine. So I understand what you're going through and why you're together. I also want to recognize that I have Graham Savio with me. Graham is the Ag Issue Leader at Cooperative Extension, and he has some important information to share as he works through some of the things that local governments can be focusing on related to the food system. For those of you that were present last July, Joe and the leadership had asked me to present to TCOG the food system plan that had been created by the Food Policy Council for the county, and it was unanimously accepted by the county as well. And so today I'll just briefly go over that plan, but also really focus on the things that local governments can do. So when the plan was first discussed, we had identified a number of vulnerabilities in our food system that exist right now. There's urgency to act. And so those are the reasons that we spent developing and then coming up with an implementation plan for the food system. So I'm going to move to my PowerPoint now. All right.
So Don,
You got it.
Don Taylor tells me that I should ask you to provide this to her afterwards so that we can make it part of the record.
Sure, I can send it to her as a PDF.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
Okay. So the food system plan was working to characterize the local food system, which had never been done for Tompkins County until we did this during the pandemic. And the overarching came up with some overarching themes that we heard from over 2,000 residents that responded to our request for information about the food system plan. And then I want to talk about the role local government can play, that during this discussion that you will ask questions and also exchange ideas with each other, because there are many ways that you are already engaging with the food system plan. So this slide shows the vulnerabilities and the opportunities within the food system right now. And globally, the food system contributes 30% of the greenhouse gases. That's from production, processing, transportation, and then food waste. And Joe just attended a recent movie that the Food Policy Council put on called Common Ground, which identifies soil as the largest and best receptor for carbon when we're trying to take carbon out of the atmosphere. It's done by the photosynthesis process and then is taken to the roots and stored in the ground. It may be interesting for you to also know that 90% of the food that's consumed in Tompkins County does not come from a local source. It's also interesting that of all the land that you see around Tompkins County that's being farmed, 94% of that if the land is used to feed animals, that's not part of land growing food for humans. Also, we have food insecurity in our county. 1/8 of our residents are food insecure, and 1/4 of our residents have diets of overprocessed, unhealthy food, causing chronic diseases. So this slide shows the food system. And although we oftentimes think of farming when we think about food, that's at the top of the page, but there's also infrastructure to move it around and to process it. There's a retail part of it where we purchase the food. There's access and food security, which affects people differently. There's the consumption, which we all are engaged in several times a day. And then there's the waste stream, which, if composted, comes back into the production end of things. So the question is, why would we want to have a local food system plan? And in 2020, globally, the food business was a $6 trillion, that's with the T, dollar business. And the United States is a $2 billion with a B dollar business. So you can imagine operations that are engaged in the food system, and they actually control the food system and supply 90% of the food that's consumed in our county. But like air and water, food is a necessity. It's something that we need to survive. And each of us makes several food system decisions every day with the food we put in our body, as well as purchasing or ways that we acquire food. And it's important to note that your decisions on how you access the food system today will be creating this food system for our future. And then good plans are necessary for good decision making. And so that's the reason why we would put together the food system plan. And for those of you that are interested, you could go to our website, which is tompkinsfoodfuture.com, and then you can find it at that location. So as I mentioned, 30% of the carbon that's greenhouse gases that are released come from the food system. So the food system affects the climate, is affected by the climate and the water cycle, also carbon capture and greenhouse gas emissions. In the economy, if you think about property tax assessment, property tax was the reason that property tax is used for local governments, is that was the way of predicting one's ability to accumulate wealth. Back whenever farming was the main occupation and acquiring resources and wealth from the land. And if we were to think about increasing food production in Tompkins County, we could actually be making that rural land an asset and be a predictor and a creator for wealth to help pay property taxes. And also the local food system allows money to be recirculated within the economy several times before it would necessarily leave. And it's also to build social structure as folks are working together or distribute it around the community. And then also food plays a big role in human and planet health. Physicians around the world are recommending whole food plant-based diet with less reliance on red meat, but also eating food that are highly nutritious, which means they're not highly processed and use less herbicide and pesticides, affect both human and planet health. So this is a slide I showed a year ago, which is just our production at a glance. And it does show that 75% of the farms in Tompkins County are small farms. And for those of us like Joe and I that live on the southern side of the county, where the land is hills are much steeper and there aren't large fields, you can see that small farms have taken over, and commodity farming is no longer what you see. We're no longer growing oats and corn and wheat and having large dairies. And you can see a few other interesting facts about farming on this slide as well. And this slide shows the retail, which means that there are 113 retail outlets in Tompkins County, and a good chunk of those are convenience stores or dollar stores, which are not supplying local produce. And oftentimes the foods that they do supply are overprocessed. And in doing so, they create food deserts for getting healthy foods. And then transportation becomes an issue for folks that don't have access to transportation. You'll see that there are farmers markets in 6 communities, and there are a number of vendors that are using that. So that's another way that food is distributed. And this slide does mention 17 food pantries countywide. There's one in every municipality. And there are 25 businesses that are supplying food to the food bank of the Southern Tier. This slide just highlights the food access and insecurity in Tompkins County, showing that over 1/8 of our population is food insecure. And it also highlights Toomersburg, Groton, and Ulysses as areas that are food insecure. This slide talks about our consumption, showing that we have obesity in this significant percent of the adults, and that typically comes from food choices. So one of the biggest comments that we received from our from the folks that took our surveys and responded to us is that increasing access to healthy food is the highest priority identified by our community members. So that provides a challenge for us as individuals and also as collective groups like local governments. And the final slide from our food characterization talks about waste. What's surprising on this slide for many is that in Tompkins County in the year 2020, 3.4 million pounds of food was composted at Cayuga Compost. That was food that was retrieved from Tompkins County. And also you'll see that 1,400 pounds of food is rescued by the Friendship Donation Network every day, and that number has increased since that time. And this slide is interesting, and it shows the barriers to for waste, which is insufficient funding for residential collection. And then there's opportunities such as providing more access for residential collection and using funds that are coming from New York State for the New York food donation. And also offering food waste recycling from schools and restaurants are all opportunities for managing a waste stream. So moving on to the food system plan, what we were able to discern from the over 2,000 comments that we received were 3 directions that they'd like to see our food system take. And these are directions that we can use for individual choices as well as our collective actions. And again, just will mention that you can find this plan on our website at tompkinsfoodfuture.com. So the 3 directions were identified for each of them. So there are 9 goals total. And I will spend a little time on some of these goals where local governments can spend their time and maybe attention to supporting the food system. And this would be a chance for Graham to jump in. So the roles for local government. In the building resilience goal, goal number 1 is to mitigate and adapt to climate risks that affect the food system. So goal number 1.2 is to incentivize the transition for farmers participating in payments for ecosystem services. Let Graham jump in to talk about both number 1 and 2, because Cooperative Extension and Soil Water Conservation District both have programs available that municipal leaders should be aware of. So Graham, you're on.
All right, thanks, Don. Yeah, this is one that I don't have a slide about. I do have a slide deck that I'll bring up after this. But just to mention, ecosystem service payment programs are a potential mechanism by which farmers and land managers could be paid to do things like sequester carbon, manage stormwater, decrease flooding, increase resilience to drought, increase biodiversity. So these are the sorts of ecosystem services that farmers and land managers provide to society and to the community already. Compensating them explicitly for those things could enable land managers and farmers who are doing these sorts of things really effectively stay in business easier. So that we're working on a pilot program at CCE Tompkins, looking at this. We've been doing that for a couple of years now, and we've been in conversation with the Department of Ag and Markets and DEC about whether the state is interested in doing something like this. The final scoping plan for the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, does include in it a recommendation for a state payment for ecosystem services pilot program. But that's the timeline for that is unclear. And then climate mitigation and adaptation activities on farms can include a whole broad spectrum of things, from cover crops and reduced tillage to things like agroforestry and prescribed and managed grazing. And so that's sort of a spectrum of things, the former being maybe a little easier to adopt and more broadly applicable, cover crops and reduced tillage, and the latter being a little more specific and specialized, agroforestry, but also commensurately more impact per acre, especially in terms of carbon sequestration potential. I'll leave it at that unless anybody has questions.
All right. Probably it's going to be best to raise your hand unless Joel's keeping track of everyone for us to see if there are any questions that are asked. So goal number 2 is to double local food production within Tompkins County. So currently we are supplying 10% of the food, which means we'd be moving up to 20%, which is a pretty heavy lift. Earlier, that farming of commodity products has been decreasing in Tompkins County over time, and smaller niche farming, vegetable farming, forestry farming, and forest products, homesteading and gardens are picking up as activities that are considered farming happening in Tompkins County. I'll just point out that in our town of Caroline, the farmer with the most revenue is farming 5 acres, and he's creating vegetables that he sells in a CSA. And so farmers that have transitioned out of dairy and are now raising beef are not getting the type of revenue that he is on a much less acreage. So that's part of a transition that's taking place around Tompkins County. So when we get to the second goal, number 2.2 is to pursue funding to enable local farmers and processors to expand infrastructure. And we have identified that there are many with infrastructure needs within Tompkins County, such as commercial kitchens. Although there are some, there are never enough. There's more demand than there are commercial kitchens available. There's also, for anybody that's aware of folks that have meat that they want to have slaughtered and processed and done by a USDA certified facility. If you have lambs, you have to get in the queue to have them slaughtered before they've even been born. So that's how critical the need is. We're also looking for coolers and freezers and cooperatives to help farmers that are growing vegetables have a way to keep them available and fresh for the consumer for a number of weeks to be able to get them to the stores. So number 3 is actually one that hopefully we can have a little bit broader discussion, and that is the partner to develop systems to prioritize and protect land for food production. I think Graham has some things he wants to mention about purchase of development rights. And also we've learned from Joel that Danby has a very creative way to help farmers and keep conservation land available. So maybe I'll let Graham, you start out, and then Joel can jump in and take questions.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, I do have a slide about that I'd like to touch on later. I'd also note that my colleague Crystal Buck, our farmland protection educator here at CCE Tompkins, is the expert on this, and you could spend a whole hour talking about this topic. So I'm hesitant to get too far into it, but I will mention that the state of New York has a farmland protection implementation grants program, which provides a couple $1 million for each REDC around the state, and the pot of funding for the southern tier has been untapped for some time. Crystal, my colleague, is working on a program in collaboration with the Finger Lakes Land Trust and the New York Agricultural Land Trust to do a pre-application process for Tompkins County landowners and farmers to enable them to work with the New York Ag Land Trust and Finger Lakes Land Trust to apply for funding to compensate them for the development rights associated with their land. So that's an ongoing program that's being piloted this year. And if anybody's interested, I would encourage you to talk to Crystal Buck, or I can send along a quick announcement if you want to send it along to the farmers in your community. But yeah, I would love to hear from Joel about the work that the Denby's been doing on this.
Well, our initiative is aimed primarily at protecting, keeping land undeveloped, and not specifically focused on farming, but it does have the effect of ensuring that land that is in agriculture will not be converted to other uses. And it's pretty simple in concept, is that land permanently protected by conservation easement, and in fact it also provides for temporary easements for the first time, with a minimum commitment of 15 years. You get a reduction in your amount of taxes that you have to pay on the land that's protected. It would give you, it starts at 50% for a 15-year commitment, and goes up to 90% for a permanent easement, and that is on the town tax. There's an option for the school district and for school districts and for the county to opt in, but we haven't yet approached either of them about doing so. Unfortunately, we've discovered it only applies to town of Danby conservation easements, of which there are but 8. And it doesn't apply to the ones that were in place before the legislation was enacted that enables us to do it. So we only have at the moment 3 conservation easements that are qualified to even participate. We're looking to expand that to at least include all the easements that were in place since we started, which wasn't all that long ago, but it's all 8 of them. And some of us are interested in expanding it to include easements by other organizations, like the Finger Lakes Land Trust, of which there are several in the town of Danby. The question that I guess what I would ask is to what extent having that program would make a difference to an agricultural producer. I mean, all of our easements are voluntary. We have we don't have any money to buy development rights, to bring to bear. Our best agricultural land it starts out at class 2 and gets worse from there. So it's already difficult to make a decent living doing agriculture in Tompkins County. Adding the additional hurdle of having to work harder to make your soil suitable for use it makes it all that much harder. And we do have some good soils, but they're mostly not flat, so they're not suited to tillage. They're very good for grazing, and of course the current trend towards berms and swales on the contour would make them usable for other kinds of production, but that requires a significant input up front in energy to set it up. And again, that's an impediment to doing it. So the discussion, I think, probably ought to be on a larger sense, on a larger level, is what does protecting the land do for agriculture? I mean, it clearly, it reserves it for the purpose. As Don pointed out, it's a very small fraction of the land that has historically been used in agriculture. It's actually used for food production for humans as opposed to food production for animals. We could feed the entire county on a fraction of the land that is currently being used for agriculture, if it were used to produce food for people and not food for animals. How do we, and we would be doing more of that if it were more profitable to do it. But I'll let you address that question. It's wandering afield here to the larger discussion that we probably get to at the end.
Okay, thanks, Joel. I know that a couple of municipalities instituted purchase of development rights. They worked with the state on that. I was wondering if Jason or anyone had any comments about the PDR process and how that went. I'm guessing. Oh,
The farmland protection type stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
we're talking
I mean-
about purchase of development rights.
Of which there have been a couple of good
Oh,
examples in
yeah.
Dryden.
Yeah, I mean, we had the front. I mean, the last time we did it, I don't know, it's probably 10 years ago or something, but we had to front the money for the state for about 4 years before we got repaid. Just being like, if you don't have the money up front to do it, it'll be hard. Because I'm, I don't know if the state can do better now than it did with us on the last one we did, but we floated something like close to $700,000 for 4 years for them. And then I know we had somebody apply a couple, like maybe I want to say like 5 years ago, but they backed out for some reason, and I don't really know why. It had nothing to do with the town why they backed out, but it might have to do. It was the carpenters, and the only thing I can think of is that they ended up getting a solar lease. That might be why they backed out, but I never heard officially why.
So Jason's story is similar to other ones we've heard, that there have been quite a few hurdles to overcome for the purchase of development. And that's why I think it's encouraging that the town of Danby has been looking for other ways to work around this. And as Graham mentioned, Crystal Buck has quite a good story to tell. And if you're at all interested in helping farmers preserve land for agriculture, I recommend getting Crystal to speak to your planning boards or your town boards. So the next item, number 2.4, is expanding urban and community food production. And this is talking about gardens. Some communities have community gardens, and some food pantries now are looking to start gardens to supply food for their pantries. So those are the type of initiatives that can happen. What's interesting, if many of you have seen a cob of corn that has a number of kernels on it, like about 100, and yet if you take one of those kernels and plant it in the ground, the next year you'll have another 100. That's 100 to 1 fold increase, which is called wealth generation. So I'll throw that out as something to consider, that farming is actually a way to create wealth. And Joel meant that we also need to think about ways for farming to become profitable. It seems to be clear in the last several years that the monopoly that's been controlling the food system is taking advantage of a number of things, including the vulnerabilities and scarcity of things, and really increasing food prices. And almost anybody that goes to shop for groceries now seems like they're paying twice as much as they were a year or two ago. And so that is increasing the price that's made available for farmers that are selling directly to customers. And so that provides some optimism that we may see more CSAs and more farmers markets coming to be. And number 2.5 is expand and support education and mentoring and training programs. This is an opportunity for local governments essentially to raise the lens of the food system. Your different committee works, whether it's environmental work, your environmental committees or your ag committees, to think of it, the impacts of those programs and those policies on the food system and how you can advance the food system and support your local community at the same time. So this is a little bit more on building resilience. And goal number 3 is to promote coordination and collaboration among food system stakeholders to meet the needs. And number 3.5 is to integrate food system actions with existing community and government plans. So as I mentioned before, this is an opportunity to raise awareness within your community about the food system, how important it is to everyone's health and security, and that it's an opportunity to work on protecting the environment, as well as increasing wealth generation and economic activity in your communities. And what's interesting about food production is most of the time it occurs in the rural communities, which seem to have been overlooked by Ithaca Area Economic Development and other economic development groups who seem to be more focused on bringing money into the higher density areas and where there are business parks. So this would spread some of that economic development around. And number 3.4 is to increase participation, support, and investment from local governments and businesses and organizations in the food system. And one of the things we're doing is looking for local governments to spend more money supporting food production or thinking about ways to support food production. I mentioned before about commercial kitchens and slaughterhouses, thinking about regulations within your towns to allow those type of businesses to come to the fore and be present in your community. The second vision is to improve private equity and economic opportunity, cultivate equity and community economic opportunity. And goal number 4.7 is to have food insecurity rates by increasing access to affordable, nutritious, and safe food. And many of you are aware of food pantries in your community, and they were developed many years ago as an emergency response to food shortages. But it turns out now, 20 some odd years later, that now they are a staple for many people, providing a regular source of food for them. Because this started out as an emergency, was following the same model as emergency services, means it was a volunteer organization. It turns out that all the food pantries are still volunteer organizations, and the average age of the volunteer now is 74. So we're looking at food pantries as a staple of the food system, but it's not. It has not had the time and energy put in to make it a firm and consistent and dependable source for the ongoing future. So the Food Policy Council and the Tompkins Food Future have been looking to find grants that we can put more money into the food pantry system and look at ways to make it more efficient and find ways for cooperation and collaboration and just trying to re-envision food pantry system works. And number 5 is to grow land access and food production for members of the BIPOC community and historically excluded residents. And I know Graham has some things he wants to say about this, and maybe he wants to show slides a little bit later, but Graham, if you have a couple of comments you can make about this, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Don. I would highlight the work of Cuba International in Enfield, who are connecting BIPOC folks with land And the American Farmland Trust Farmland for a New Generation program is a program that generally connects landowners with farmers. And so landholders who are not farming their land with people who will farm their land, or either purchasing it or renting it. And they have sort of an exclusive focus, but they are working hard to ensure that they're including Black, Indigenous, and people of color in that process in terms of getting folks access to land. One other element, I guess, that I would mention here is one of the conversations we at Cooperative Extension are hearing a lot in the community is about communal land access and cooperative farm ownership and management. And that seems, that's something that there aren't a whole lot of great examples for. In my presentation, I have a link to a resource, a pretty extensive resource about how folks have done that successfully. And there are a couple of attempts at that going on now. So just something to keep in mind as a local government. You know, not all farming is a small nuclear family running a farm. Sometimes it's a communally owned or cooperatively owned structure or managed structure.
All right. So I just have just a couple more slides here, and then we'll get to Graham's presentation that he wants to share with you. So number 6.1 is to invest in the gaps in our food system infrastructure. And I essentially covered this under 2.2 earlier about commercial kitchens and slaughterhouses and coolers and freezers and so on. So the final vision direction is to promote human and ecosystem health. And number 8.2 and 8.1 deal with curbside food scrap collection. I will share that Kat McCarthy from the Resources and Materials Management Office Department at the county has this is a priority of that group. And if your municipality is looking to do more, then you should invite Kat to speak with you. She's looking for opportunities, and there is state funding to support this work as well. So it's a real opportunity to capture food and have it become part of the compost system. And also, she's also would be working with Friendship Donation Network to rescue food while it's still usable. And then number 9.4 is integrate nutrition education into community life. And I can't say it more forcefully that as a society, we need a ton of diet information. What the food we eat is our medicine. And we've seen that folks that are eating overprocessed food that has its nutritious elements removed and has salt and sugar put in its place have chronic diseases, and many of them are avoidable. So the recommendation is to eat a whole food plant-based diet with much less red meat. And if we know the ingredients of our food, like we do know the ingredients of our medicine, then we can make good choices. So this is an opportunity for local governments to support community education around food choices and around diet in your communities. So closing in, this is the Food System Pledge. And those of you who watched the presentation last year, remember this slide. So this talks about the 3 directions and the 9 goals. And we're encouraging individuals, municipal governments, and even TCOG to agree to sign this pledge. And one of you could make a motion and have a resolution such you have a quorum today to sign on to this pledge, which means that you're supporting these efforts to have a healthier community. And then finally, oftentimes I get questions about what can we do individually to make a difference. And here are some lists of things, and you'll find them on the food system plan, page 69 and 70. And finally, these are the contact information for Katie Hollis, who's the coordinator for the food system plan implementation, and myself. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Graham I'll let him share his screen if he's allowed to do so. And by Taylor, and we'll go from there for questions.
Thanks, Don.
I have to stop sharing. There you go.
There we go. How much time, this meeting goes until 4 o'clock? Is that true?
Well, there are other items on the agenda, but we can go to what, 4:30?
30.
Okay, so I'll try to stay to 10 minutes or so. All right. Which of my screens are you seeing? The notes or the presentation?
Presentation, I believe.
Looks like a presentation.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much for having me here today. Thanks, Don, for sort of coordinating this invitation. Thanks, Joel, for starting the conversation. As Don mentioned, I'm the agriculture lead at Cooperative Extension in Tompkins County. I've been here about 4 years. We've got a great team of educators here, some of whom I'll reference later on in this presentation. And I'm going to move forward here. So this is what we're going to talk about briefly. Don gave a lot of great information about the why we should care about local food systems and regional food systems. I'm not going to dwell on that, just going to add one more small piece. Also acknowledging, again, this is a high-level review. If you want more information about any of what I have here, I can direct you to people who can spend a whole hour talking about any one of these slides. These are the areas that we're going to talk about, and then hopefully we'll have a little time for discussion. So this is one more reason to care about agriculture in your communities. Cost of community service studies are a way to look at the ratio of expenditures to revenues for different land uses. And so you can see here, residential is a whole lot more expensive on a ratio of expenditures to revenues compared to agriculture and commercial and industrial uses. So encouraging agriculture may not bring in as much revenue per acre to the town, but the cost is significantly lower as well. So on balance, agriculture and commercial industrial are good ways to use your land if you're looking at your balance sheet. And I have a link in the resources at the end of this to some more resources around why you should care about local food systems and some of the multiplier effects for spending locally. But I'm not going to get too deep into that now. So again, just to review, these are some people who you might want to invite in for a further conversation about any of these things. And I'm sure folks know some of these folks, and happy to make introductions as well. So one of the first and best ways that local governments can engage in regional food systems is through planning work, and that's sort of how it can often start. Agriculture and farmland protection plans are in place. I don't know offhand across the county how many of the towns have them, but many of you, and you all know if you have an ag farmland protection plan in your town. And there is a plan for the whole county as well. The town of Caroline currently doing an ag farmland protection plan. Crystal Buck, my colleague, is working closely there. And so that's where a lot of these conversations start. A couple of the things that can come out of that farmland protection planning work can be the sort of purchase of development rights work that I mentioned earlier, and conservation easements. Farmland protection implementation grants can come after farmland protection planning grants, which are, again, one of the ways through which landowners are compensated for the purchase of their development rights. And as Jason mentioned, it can take a while for that compensation to actually come through from the state. So working with a partner who can cash flow that is important. Another note is the importance of keeping agriculture at the table as you're getting into comp plans and zoning conversations. So sometimes agriculture can come in the middle or at the end. Having agriculture there at the table on the steering committee right from the start is a really powerful way for municipalities to support agriculture in the community. And then under zoning, here's a couple examples of just things to keep in mind when you're doing zoning work. Again, that not all farming, it looks like a nuclear family owning and managing a farm. Cooperative farming and communal land access are also ways that farming can appear. farm support businesses and farm processing are also vital parts of the farming economy. So it's not just cropland that matters for farming. Agricultural districts are a process by which the state helps municipalities keep farming in mind and when zoning is concerned. And this is one where my colleague Crystal Buck could also give you a whole hour on ag districts. And I have a link here. I'll share this. I'll share this presentation at the end. But the farm friendly zoning audit is one way to see how your zoning aligns with the priorities of farming and what the farming sector needs. Another thing to keep in mind and sort of squarely within your bailiwick, property taxes. So these first three, agricultural assessment, farm building exemptions, and historic barns exemptions, are things that I expect most of you are already doing. Farms are already get an ag assessment that helps them save on their property taxes. And again, Crystal could talk to you more about the specifics of farm building exemptions and historic barns exemptions from property taxes. And there's also a link in the resources about this. And New York State and federal conservation easement tax credits are a way through which an individual or a corporation can get a reduction in their income taxes because they have a conservation easement on their land. And that one is sort of asterisk because it's not necessarily your role as a municipality to work on income taxes, but it's something that's often missed, that a conservation easement qualifies someone for income tax credits. And then another one that's again not squarely in the realm of the municipality, but farm donations to food pantries also get a tax credit of up to $5,000 per year. So if you have a food pantry in your community, make sure that they are providing the documentation to farmers who are donating to them, so the farmers can get their tax credit. Direct investment is another way where municipalities can play a role. Another asterisk here, because I recognize the municipality doesn't run the Economic Development Council, but as I see it, there's often a lot of overlap and communication and exchange there. And whatever power you have in the Ithaca Area Development Council, I don't remember what the Ithaca Area one is called. Locally owned investment funds are one vehicle by which other economic development councils around the country have put money into agriculture. And there's two examples in the resources at the end of this, the Walden Mutual Fund and another one out of Massachusetts, that are examples of locally owned investment funds that focus on food systems and agriculture, and where the profits all flow right back into the community. Infrastructure investments through economic development councils, not only transportation, but also potentially processing, farm processing. And then again, cooperatively owned farms and businesses are a mechanism by which economic development councils could invest in agriculture. There are a whole slew of federal and state grants that farmers can qualify for. And so governments have a limited role in potentially telling farmers about those. There are also a lot of state and federal grants that can help farmers where the municipality is the eligible entity. And so here's two here just as examples: the Community Facilities Direct Loan Program and the Rural Business Development Program. Community Facilities Loan and Grant Program, a municipality can get funded to pay for a community garden or a food pantry or a food hub or a greenhouse. These are all things that the municipality could pay for with this grant funding or this loan funding. And then the Rural Business Development Grant Program, municipalities can apply for funding to provide planning assistance and job training, land acquisition, which is one that's really hard to actually get grant funding for, especially from the USDA, capital acquisition, and all those sorts of things. So that's another way by which the municipality itself can get money and hand it off to farmers. You can find more grants at this grants.gov. You can sort by eligibility and find the ones, and then search for farm and sort by municipality as the eligible entity. The sort of direct activities that municipalities do can often have impacts on farms. So I think most of you have a town ag committee. Not all do. So that's an important way by which municipalities can support the agricultural community. Don mentioned a municipal curbside food scrap collection program, I believe. And so that exists in the city of Ithaca. I don't know the extent to which it exists in other communities. Ditch work and roadside mowing is something that can sometimes be forgotten, but it has impacts on farming and it can be impacted by farming. And so coordinating that work potentially with a town ag committee. Frank came to the Ag Farmland Protection Board last year to talk about weeds on the roadside and the impacts that they are having on farm fields, and then thinking about coordinating mowing to avoid the seeds getting into farm fields. And then seasonal farm activities are something that happen every year. So planting season, you'll see a lot of tractors on the road. Harvest season, you'll see a lot of tractors on the road. At times during the summer, you'll see manure spreading equipment on the roads. Towns could play a role there in just sending information out through your channels. Keep an eye out for the farmers who are on the road at this time of year. Here's sort of a wild card idea, using marginal municipal land and making it available for small scale specialty agriculture, nursery propagation, that sort of thing. And then host a farmer's market or community garden in your community. And again, a lot of you are already doing this. Solar in New York State, as you're all maybe painfully aware, maybe happily aware, local government has a significant role. And in the regulations and laws that you are writing, keep agriculture in mind when you're thinking about solar. Farmland is needed. It's a limited resource. And so discouraging or penalizing siting on prime farmland is really important for agriculture success into the future. And pilot and community benefit agreements are really important on a whole lot of levels, but keeping agriculture in mind and at the table when you're thinking about how those funds are distributed is really important. There's potential to offset the negative impacts on farmland with some of those benefit agreements, potentially setting up farmland protection funds or that sort of thing through those funding mechanisms. And then agrivoltaics, there's a couple pictures here of agrivoltaics that are going on around the country. The one in the middle with the sheep is on Cornell land. The one under that, Jack Solar Garden, I believe, is in Colorado. They have just a couple acres where they're doing some really intensive experimentation of growing crops under solar panels. The one on the top is in Vermont. They're growing saffron under solar panels, so a really high value crop. And often that's one way to go about it. Really high value crop under the solar panels. And there's research going on at Cornell into agrivoltaics, and we have a staff person here, Guillermo Metz, who I'm sure some of you know, who's focusing and thinking about municipally owned solar installations around the county and trying to understand how those can happen and support them in whatever way you can. And the last mechanism here is really could potentially be the first, and I kind of leave off with this one because it's really the most important. You can support agriculture by building relationships with agricultural entities, and that's exactly what you're doing here. Thanks for having us here. Thanks for inviting Don at the Food Policy Council, inviting me at CCE. I'd encourage you to engage with Farm Bureau, with the Soil and Water Conservation District, and keep talking to us. Making your space available for agricultural programming can be really helpful. Hosting networking events for farmers, that can be it's often overlooked how helpful it can be for farmers just to get farmers together in the same room to talk to each other about their concerns and their priorities and their needs. Attending agricultural programs in your community can be really helpful and help you get to know your farming community. And then this last one is just thinking beyond Tompkins County or thinking beyond your town's borders, coordinating any planning you're doing or investment you're doing with regard to agriculture with neighbors, with neighboring counties and neighboring towns and county government and all that. I will leave it there. There's a couple of references and resources here at the end. And yeah, thank you very much.
And if you can share that with Taylor, then we can send that on to folks afterwards too.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. I'm going to take a little bit of time for discussion. I'm hoping that we could maybe focus in on what, if anything, we as a group could do beyond what our individual municipalities could do. And you've pointed out some things that we all could do as municipalities that some of which I was aware of and some of which I was not. One thing that has dogged me for my entire life as a very, very small producer who occasionally has a surplus beyond what he's producing for himself is where to market it. Larger producers can plug in, can develop a CSA and can or become a part of a farmer's market. Somebody who has an extra bushel of tomatoes or squash or green beans or something has a little bit harder time trying to figure out what do I do with this. Other than giving it away, which of course there's value in, but it's not very gratifying to grow a crop to give it away. The opportunities are rather limited for small time marketing. Green Star is there. You don't go to Wegmans and say, I got an extra bushel of green beans. I tried that, doesn't work. So having a local outlet, we're about to have in Danby, the Danby Food and Drink is coming soon. How many, is there any way that a local government could facilitate the development of local outlets other than hosting a farmer's market?
I would say there are 2 federal grants that I mentioned earlier that could potentially provide funding for the development of local markets. I don't know all the details of those 2 grants, but the municipality is an eligible entity, an eligible applicant for those grant opportunities, and could pass that funding along to folks trying to start marketing outlets. I'll also acknowledge marketing is not as much my strength, and we do have an ag marketing person here now who could also answer questions that folks have about marketing.
Mark.
Oh, I just had a couple comments. One, it seems like part of the solution Don mentioned is that I think you said that there's I inferred that it's a CSA, and Caroline is the most economically viable farm in the town now. That's producing vegetables for people. And we noted the problem that 94% of the land is used to grow animals for people, I guess. So it seems like that's the solution, is to, convert to, it's a viable solution. It's economically viable. So I don't know. I'd be interested in Don's and Graham's comments or observations on that, and how, if we can facilitate the transition to vegetable production and consumption. Is it a consumer issue or what?
So I'll just take a little bit of stab at this, and I think it speaks somewhat to Joel's question as well. There are many people that are that want to do farming, and they are able to do some of it, but they have to have a job off the farm to supply health care and so on. And so whenever you have these small farms, finding venues to sell your product or move them is an issue. And so one of the things that have been talked about is setting up cooperatives where a number of small farmers come together. And this is actually done by Stick and Stone, where they have a number of producers that come together and market under one umbrella. And so this allows small farmers that are using, have just a small amount of acreage or a small amount of time to put in, to now leverage and put together enough food that they can sell at a farm stand or something. So in that, Mark, you may remember a number of years ago that there was a farmer's market that was in the parking lot at the town hall as a way to try to jumpstart a farmer's market that eventually moved to the Brooktondale Community Center. But there may be So if municipalities were looking to support the marketing of material through providing resources like space and so on, just we need to engage in the conversation. And I'm on the Caroline Ag Committee, and those are the conversations we're having right now about how to move from people who want to grow food to having a place to sell them on a regular, consistent basis, and be able to transition from doing it as a hobby or a part-time job into more of a full-time job. And it's not an easy transition, and so we're trying to help with that. And for Joel, I will just say that I'm in a similar position, but I've decided that I'm not going to try to sell it, although I do have a farm stand, and some product moves from the farm stand, but most of it goes to the local food pantry or Friendship Donations Network.
Mhm.
So Graham, I don't know if you wanted to jump in on Mark's question.
I think you hit a lot of it, Don. I would just echo the value of looking at cooperative marketing strategies. Full Plate Farm Collective is that great example that's right here in town. And the value of short supply chains of sort of selling direct to consumers instead of through an intermediary or as a crop that gets fed to animals and the animals are fed to human beings. From my understanding of the research, it's not conclusive that those short value chains are more profitable to farmers because there's a lot of other things that make it variable and hard to make that conclusion, but there is good evidence that they're more resilient than the long supply chains. And we saw that absolutely during the pandemic, where farmers who had direct relationships with their consumers and with their buyers maintained those markets, and folks who did not struggled to some extent with finding markets for their goods.
I really like the idea that I think popped up maybe a couple times of developing community gardens that would support food pantries. I think that's an exciting thing to consider.
Is anybody here from Enfield? I believe Enfield is doing something like that right now.
Bob is here from Enfield, right?
He is.
Yeah, super
You know,
compelling. I agree, Mark.
Mhm. Do you know about that effort in Enfield, Bob?
I'm not sure he hears you, Joel.
I'm not sure he's paying attention, right? Yeah, the marketing is if you only occasionally have something is rather a bit of an obstacle, because the labor involved in even doing it, even participating in the farmers market, you know, quickly swamps anything you might gain from market what you're marketing. So unless you can share the marketing with others who are in a similar situation, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Unless you're sort of doing it just for the good of the community, which you can do to a certain extent, but our local agricultural producers are doing a lot of that already with growing things to give away or practically give away. And something Don said earlier as a bright spot is that, rising food prices make it at least possible to, if you scale up production to actually make enough money to make it worthwhile. I think that more than anything would help. But it's hard on a small scale because of the economies of doing things by machine on larger scales makes it very difficult to compete when you're doing a lot of manual labor, particularly in harvesting. Easy with squash, not so great with green beans or
To that point,
blueberries.
the CSA that I think Don alluded to, I'm pretty sure I know which CSA he's talking about. There's a lot of hand labor involved in the production there, I'm sure. and they're very successful. So that's encouraging.
Yeah, this CSA has a number of young folks that are interested in learning about farming. And so some of it's their education, but they're really committed to growing healthy food and sharing that with the community. So it's kind of like many farmers, that's a philosophical perspective on the world that you live in and the
Yeah.
craft that you bring. And that's, I guess, what's so special about farming. But we need to, there are many things that have been decisions by the federal government and policies and some by the state government that have really put a big thumb on small farmers. And we're looking through the local food system to change that around for local producers and find ways that we can work together. That's going to be our best way forward.
I just wanted to comment on the agrivoltaics that Graham showed, and maybe that's where municipalities, if we could have a role in promoting agrivoltaics, especially that allow production of vegetable crops, that you showed a couple of those, that seems like fertile ground to me.
Yeah, certainly. And if folks want to learn more about that, Guillermo Metz would be happy to talk to y'all.
Fortunately, there aren't too many things that grow better in the shade.
It's interesting. There's a publication that I saw recently that had a curve for a number of different crops and forages and all different crops, and there are a few of them where there's a little bit of like if your axes are productivity and shade, increasing shade going this way and increasing productivity going this way, a lot of them sort of look like that. Like 20% shade is often optimal productivity. Yeah. Not true for grain crops. All grain crops, it looks like this. All grain crops, any amount of shade is basically bad for them. But a lot of vegetable crops can do okay with a little bit of shade.
Yeah, cool. There was a New York Times article about agrivoltaics within the last year that pointed that out, that it can produce an environment that's very positive for a lot of agriculture. So, and
again, from a resilience perspective, outcomes can be really variable. If you're growing a crop under agrivoltaics and you have a really hot, sunny year, then that shade is going to increase your productivity even more. It's going to really help. And if you have a wet, cold year, you're going to have a really bad year under those solar panels, whereas otherwise it might have been okay. So it's really variable.
Great. Thank you.
Well, food for thought, and maybe follow up after some thought. That nothing jumps immediately to mind as I say, oh, Julie, here's what we ought to do as a group. I mean, other than perhaps, pledge, but I'm not sure how much of a difference it would make to say, well, TCOG supports, the strategies that are set forth in the food system plan. But
so, Joe, I'll answer your question about how much good it would do. So currently, the county has been providing funding support for Katie's salary that's working on this plan. And we're looking to go to other funders for grant support for programming and also to support Katie to maybe put in more hours than she's able to put in now. So I want to be very acknowledged and be very grateful for the public support that has been given to the implementation of the food system plan. But as we go around to other funders, and we just recently went for a grant with the Community Foundation, and we showed them the over 200 people that have signed on the pledge, and that was really gratifying that we had that kind of support within the community. So we're trying to build that up. And having municipal support would be really important for sure.
Well, with that in mind, is the group willing to entertain it? Because I'd be happy to move it.
Do you have a resolution to move, Joel?
Well, it would be pretty simple, which is that the TCOG support the food system, take the pledge, if you will, supporting the food system plan.
Did you just move it?
Yeah, yes.
I'll second it. We're just,
Yeah. Discussion. Pierre?
I just want to check. It feels like we've lost people. Do we still have enough people to do this?
good question.
You do.
Good.
Ready to vote?
It looks like we might be.
Okay, Pierre,
Aye.
Joanne? Yep, okay, got it. Mark,
Yes.
Dan Lamb,
Yes.
Tim Murray,
Yes.
Rod Howe,
Yes.
Ruth Groff,
Yes.
Linda Woodard,
Yes.
Aye.
Joel,
Yes.
okay. And I would just ask that the verbiage be sent to me.
Taylor, can I ask a procedural question? Tim is the alternate for Caroline, so he should probably not be counted as a vote. Do we still have a quorum without Tim?
Oh,
Wait a minute. I thought in the absence of the regular person, the alternate can vote in their stead.
Yeah, but the regular's here.
I'm the regular.
Right. Sorry.
That's
Right.
okay.
Isn't it such that, you have a quorum unless somebody challenges it?
I do agree. We have one extra, so that's okay.
Great. Thanks. Thank you.
But just as a matter of procedure, isn't it the case? It certainly is in some organizations that once you have a quorum, it's presumed to persist unless somebody challenges it. Is that our practice as well?
That's a great question, Joel, and I'll follow up with you on that at the next meeting or following the meeting, okay?
Okay, yeah. Fortunately, it isn't critical here. We're good.
Yes,
We'll
we
have-
are.
I could take it up with the parliamentarian.
Yes, right.
I mean, no matter what, I feel like if we're speaking on behalf of the whole of TCOG, it's worth having enough people here that we can say definitively we're doing that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Don and Graham, for
Thank you, Joel.
joining us and helping us to think about how to move agriculture forward.
And let us know if you'd like any follow-up deep dives on anything from any of these conversations. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Thanks.
you. All right, well, there's a few other things to deal with. And we have our subcommittee reports. I don't see a representative from the town of Ulysses here to talk about cybersecurity. Emergency planning, that's Mark, right?
Yeah, I'll just give a brief report. I did invite Joe Milliman because he's given a report. He had to leave at 4, so but maybe we can hear from him at a later meeting.
Sure.
The subcommittee did meet on May 10th and got an update from Mike and Joe. And I'll just summarize a little bit. As you may recall, the county EMS program started on April 2nd. As of the May 10th meeting, they've been called 110 times. For April, there were 84 calls. And the average time to arrive for those calls was 7 minutes. And the Tompkins County EMS program was canceled 13 times because the ambulance and rescue arrived first, and they were canceled 5 times by either an ambulance or a rescue. So that's a really brief summary. the Joe and Mike reported that the program seems to be working really well. They're getting really good reception and collaboration with the different emergency service providers throughout the county. So it's I found it very encouraging and sounds like it's working well. And that's I'll just leave it there. That's my report. If you have any questions, be happy to take them, but probably I will invite Mike and Joe again for the next meeting, and maybe they can give us an update then too. So
We'll have a couple more months dated by then too.
yeah.
Yeah, but good initial reports anyway.
I'll just add that I think our resolution was a good thing to pass. I think it sent a strong message to the county legislature. And since our last meeting, the program received another 300,000 from Senator Webb,
Yes.
which mitigates this discussion about cost sharing, perhaps even putting it off for another year to further establish this program without the downsides of municipalities feeling a new funding obligation. So that's a big deal. And I think one of the takeaways is that when you have a good program, you can find funding for it. And this was a good program. This is a good thing for this committee to promote to the county. We got the county legislators on board. Now we've got the full-throated support of the city, Mayor Cantelmo, and the senators, State Senator Webb noticed. And I just think it's one that we can all take some pride in.
Yeah.
Amen to that. Maybe maybe it'll be replicated across the state.
It may be. I think people like Anna Kellis and Senator Hinchy and Senator Webb are pushing for a state initiative modeled after this. And so in many ways, we're creating a model that the state should follow. And as I understand it, the governor is also interested in having a state-funded emergency service program that would go through the counties. So.
And a compelling advantage is that it's probably the most cost-effective way to deal with the issues.
Yeah, and the issue is ambulances with no people to ride in them, or emergency, light response vehicles with no personnel. I mean, we've got to have the people, and if we don't have the people, then we just don't have the presence. And it's hard to reverse that model. We can't create volunteers that just don't exist anymore.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay, thanks. Rod, anything on energy?
No report. We didn't meet.
And we got Bob's message on transportation.
Yeah, I submitted by email, circulated a report earlier today. Brief highlights. As we kind of expected, the TCAT general manager's position has been filled. Matthew Rosenblum Jones, who was the acting GM after Scott Vanderpool's retirement, has been promoted to full GM. The other highlight is the electric bus situation at TCAT. Still a problem. Most likely those 7 Proterra buses that were acquired will probably never see the road again because of structural problems. Their fiberglass bodies are separating from the axles, which is not a good thing. At a meeting earlier this month that TCAT administration had with riders and other representatives of the community, Matthew Rosenblum Jones said it's probably they're not fixable, and since Proterra is bankrupt, we probably won't be able to get a service person in there. And there's also a question as to whether we're going to be having any legal recourse. There's a possibility We may be able to get back some of the federal money that was spent for this, but it was not a very positive situation. So right now, the 2035 goal for full electrification is off because they have just ordered 5 new diesel-powered buses, which have a 12-year lifespan. Do the math, they would still be in service by 2035. So they haven't given up on electrification, but it is challenged right now, mainly because of the structural inadequacies of the first 7 buses that were added to the fleet. Yes, Mark.
Oh, thanks, Bob. Do you know how many are different electric bus companies there are that could provide this kind of thing? Is Proterra like the only one, or?
No. In fact, Matthew Rosenblum Jones said that future electric buses they purchase will be from a firm named Gillig, which is in California. They make electric buses. Unlikely that Proterra buses will be purchased anymore. In fact, we don't even know if that company is going to survive.
Right.
But it makes, I guess, a better bus that doesn't have the structural problem. Of course, the problem is the lead time to purchase these, and it may be several years off before we could get one of those in service. They've got to get more buses in the fleet, and to accomplish that, they in April voted to buy 5 diesel buses.
Right. Yeah. So my question was about, getting at whether, is this a problem for all electric buses? It sounds like no, it's a problem for Proterra electric buses.
I got the impression it's more a problem for this particular bus manufacturer, and other bus companies. They may have problems, but this serious frame problem, which apparently will make these buses unusable because of state regulations and the rigorous inspection the state requires. That this is unique to that company, and it's an unfortunate circumstance, but they have to err on the side of safety. They have to err on the side of state regulation. And so these buses probably more likely than not will not be used again.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Particularly unfortunate since the problems that they had were not with the drivetrains and the fact that they're electric at all, but with the overall engineering.
Yeah.
Maybe they could use the batteries as spares.
I guess we cope with what we've got, and they have other problems at TCAT with not being able to find enough drivers, maintenance problems with the buses they have, just the normal routine maintenance that they're accustomed to. And this, of course, because those 7 buses aren't usable right now, the electric buses, it does produce a shortage in the 53 bus fleet they have. And so there is a shortage just inherently because these other vehicles that they've counted on can't be used.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Any other reports before we end the meeting? Taylor conveyed yesterday that the power is supposed to go off at 5, right, Taylor?
Yes, that's true.
So we were shooting for 4:45, and I think we did it. So anything up for next time that people want to make sure gets on?
I would mention one thing, because the county legislature this past week, and I haven't seen the resolution that was adopted, they adopted a resolution supportive of certain state legislation that would promote EMS services. And the legislature is about ready to adjourn in another few days.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
If that's something that we want to consider at a future meeting.
If you want to look into it and maybe propose something, we could put it on.
I'm not prepared to put a resolution on the floor right now.
Well, not now, but
I want to consider, because chances are this is going to be an ongoing need. and
Right.
issue.
So probably too late to deal with it this time. I mean, with this legislative session, but we could, do the necessary background work and maybe propose something for the next time.
Mhm. There might be a special legislative session later this year to take up something like that. I don't know.
Mhm. So you'll look into it, Bob? With that marker.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Are you finished? I was the cybersecurity thing, and
Yeah.
maybe we could make that like an agenda item. I don't know. And does that include the Laserfish? Like,
Yeah, the laserfish could come, I heard could come up next time. But because it would have evolved to the point where we could at least find out what's going on and have a discussion about its future.
I would like that.
So I think a lot of us would.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm sure other things will come up. Thank you.
Great.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
Thank you, Taylor.